Alright, so we just got done talking through three important and key concepts for Bitcoin. Digital cash, being that there's 21 million Bitcoin. Distributed ledger, meaning that a group of peers all over the world are able to give their authorization, essentially, to whether or not your transaction is legitimate, and then carry out the transaction on your behalf by giving confirmations. And then the last one was blockchain. There's one thing, I just said it just now, that I want to point out as well. And that is Bitcoin was referred to as Satoshi by peer-to-peer. Okay, he referred to Bitcoin as a peer-to-peer cash payments network. In fact, I often, when people ask me, what's Bitcoin? And I want to give my quick, one sentence, 30-second elevator pitch. I always say Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer cash payments network. That's my response. And usually that's enough for people to say, oh, cash payments, I know what that is. Peer-to-peer, I understand that. What is this? Elaborate on all that, just so I know that we're all on the same page. Cash, we already know that, right? Bitcoin is just simply digital cash. Peer-to-peer just refers to the fact that the relationship between who holds my money today, right, is bank and Nick, right? That's the relationship. This is not, the bank and I are not peers. The bank kind of tells me what to do, when to do, and how to do, right? And they set limits, and they tell me, there's a lot of positive things that go on with banks too. I don't mean to just sit here and rip on banks, but Satoshi Nakamoto has a big problem with them, and I do as well in some regards. And like I said, we'll get to that next section. What he means by peer-to-peer is when Nick is trying to make a transaction. Let's say I'm buying a car from somebody. Or I'm buying just something simple. Let's say I'm buying, I don't know, an apple, because I love apples. Nick's giving a Bitcoin here. It's peer-to-peer because I can literally just give my Bitcoin to this gentleman here. And I don't need anybody in here to tell me yay or nay, yes or no, right? What we have is a giant network of miners, right? You remember my drawing, all over the world, from China, from Ghana, from Colombia, from Peru, from Mexico, from Canada, from Australia, everywhere. It's a giant peer-to-peer cash payments network, right? So that's important going forward. I think I made that clear last lecture. I just wanted to be sure we were all on the same page here. All right, so this section, what I want to focus on, a couple new terms here for us. I'm going to talk about mining, right? I've mentioned that before. Think gold mining. If somebody wants to mine for gold, they either need, a pan that they can go out to a river with and pan for gold, or you need really, really expensive mining equipment. And honestly, that's not too far off from what we're talking about here with Bitcoin either. Nevertheless, we'll talk about mining here in just a moment. The other concept that we have is, I'm going to call it block reward slash proof of work. Proof of work. All right. This is incentivizing. Okay, we're gonna get to this word in a minute. Incentivizing. Incentivizing. Oh boy, I already know what everybody's thinking, because you probably already know what I'm thinking. Yikes. All right. Block reward, proof of work. And the last thing in this section that I want to talk about is an idea referred to as decentralization. So far, I feel like just explaining to you how Bitcoin works, I guess the question still is our current system working with banks, greater than BTC, Bitcoin, the Bitcoin Cash Payments Network, or is Bitcoin greater than the banking system? And I don't feel like I've given anything convincing of an argument to explain that this is here a better option. I think that this brief section here, I think might start to chisel away at lifting the scales here in favor of Bitcoin. I think the mining is just incredibly fascinating. I think the idea, well, this goes hand in hand, but the block reward and the proof of work, how this works is just, at first threw me off, but now I've come to see that it's actually genius. And then the fact that it's decentralized is an incredible aspect as well. So, all right, let's start with the first term. What is mining? I hope, let's see here. Yes, okay. So here is an example of a Bitcoin miner, all right? And I'm going to talk about what it is and what it does here in just a second. I just want you to see this here is called an ant miner, all right? An ant, like literally like the little tiny bug on the ground. Ant miner. I believe this version here is called the S9. Okay, not super important that you know the name of this or remember it, but just to give you an idea, this is actually the same miner that I have. But here are two different types. This is referred to as an ASIC, A-S-I-C, ASIC type miner. It just refers to the fact that the only function of this device here is mining for Bitcoin. That's it. Okay? This here is just it's called a mining rig. Oop, wrong button. Mining rig. And this uses, oh, wrong button. Wrong letter there, bro. I guess I'm rewriting the word rig too. Mining rig, it's referred to as a GPU rig. Okay? GPU. All this refers to is the fact that, let me try and zoom in a little bit on this picture. It's not the best picture on planet Earth, but if you can kind of see these guys lined up in rows right here, these are graphics cards. You know what these are doing? These are interacting with the algorithm contained in the Bitcoin protocol referred to as the SHA-256. All right? SHA-256. You may hear about that. You may not. This is really technical, techie, nerdy lingo that I highly doubt you in 10 years are going to hear people talking through. Maybe you will. I don't know. But it's kind of like, again, remember I gave you the example of emailing somebody. If I want to email my uncle in Russia, who's not native to Russia, he just moved there. He works with a gold mining company. If I wanted to send him a letter, and let's say I've been used to sending him handwritten letters my whole life, and all of a sudden email rolls out, and now instead of having to pay several dollars to mail him a letter and it taking weeks to get to him, now I can email him, and it costs me virtually no money. It costs me the electricity and the internet in my home, but it gets to him instantly, right? Do I really care in that scenario? Do I really care how the HTTP protocol works for the internet, or how I don't even know how email works, and nor do I care, and nor should you. I mean, if you do care, fantastic, bravo. But to be honest with you, most people just want to know that they can send a piece of mail or an email to somebody across the world, and it gets to them, and they can read it, and they can interact with it and respond. And I think the same thing is true here with Bitcoin, right? We're talking about a mining rig, where people build on their own this giant rig of a computer that is used primarily and almost entirely for mining Bitcoin interacting with an algorithm referred to as the SHA-256. Okay? This is exclusive to Bitcoin. I don't believe there's another cryptocurrency that utilizes an algorithm like this. All right. And this is actually the miner device that I have in my house, an Antminer S9. Now, I was going to actually shoot a video of it and play it here, but I have a better idea. Just go to YouTube and type in Antminer S9. And I want you to just maybe pause this video and do that real quick if you can. And just pay attention to how absolutely loud this thing is. Any review you look up is going to talk about how loud it is. I will tell you firsthand experience in my basement with doors shut, with it's sitting under my desk, under my computer desk. You can still hear it all the way up in the second story of my home. It is loud. It is like, imagine like a window fan times 30. It's loud. And so anyway, I didn't know if it'd be super useful for me to show a video when you can just YouTube it yourself. It'll take you 30 seconds. But what these guys are doing here essentially is two things, okay? And this is kind of getting me into number 2 here. These devices, they do the same thing. They're just built differently, okay? It's not like this device does one thing and the Antminer over here does another. That's not the case. They're both doing the same thing. They're both doing two things here with Bitcoin. All right, both. Let's scroll out this way so I keep this all organized in my mind. What these two devices are doing, the Antminer and the mining rig, they are, one, approving. Oh my goodness, approving / validating. If anybody is curious if my handwriting is this bad in person, yes. Yes, it is. One of my employees the other day said to me, "Are you a doctor?" And I said, "No." Were you a doctor at one point? No. I've never been a doctor. And they said, "Man, you should be because your handwriting is atrocious." And I said, "Oh, thanks. I already knew that. Thank you very much. Appreciate, I don't know if that's a compliment or if that's, anyway." All right, so these guys are approving or validating transactions, okay? It's just very, very simple. I don't want this to get complicated. It doesn't need to be. It's really plain and simple. But I think it helps everybody to kind of visualize and understand. Remember, when Nick over here is sending Bob 1 Bitcoin, right? 1 BTC. I'm sending 1 Bitcoin over to Bob. Oh, this is my quick drawing of everybody. This is referred to as a transaction, right? Because I'm moving 1 Bitcoin over to Bob. This device here is partaking in this decentralized peer-to-peer cash payments network, right? The word network just refers to the fact that there are thousands, millions of these things all over the world. Remember how I drew this? I've drawn this several times now. What these little boxes represent across the world in a huge, huge network are these devices, GPUs, mining rigs, or the Antminer, the ASICs. I'm sorry, this is supposed to have a C on it. I just realized that. An Antminer S9 ASIC. And by the way, the Antminer is just an example of an ASIC. There are plenty of ASIC devices out there. In fact, the Antminer S9 is no longer the newest model. I think right now the Antminer S17S or something like that is one of the newer ones. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, these devices, these two devices right here, are all over the world. And they're running, and they're turned on, and they're connected to the Bitcoin protocol. And when Nick is giving from his wallet 1 Bitcoin over to Bob, into Bob's wallet, a bunch of these little units jump in and say, "We agree that Nick had 9 Bitcoins. He's trying to send 1. He has 8. He would have 8 now. Do we agree on the fact that this math is good? Yes or no?" Yes, we all agree. This is good. This is a good number right here. 8 is a positive number, If it was negative, it would reject this transaction. Obviously, to just be plain simple, the Bitcoin protocol is going to have no problem saying, yes, Nick, you can do whatever you want on. We don't care. These devices aren't trying to figure out why you're sending a Bitcoin to Bob. They don't care. That's irrelevant. They just want to know that the math checks out. That's all they're trying to do. So this is the first thing that all these devices are doing on the network, is approving and validating transactions. Okay. The second thing that they are doing, is they're solving a problem. Okay, this may get a little weird. Solving a problem, and you might be thinking, what problem? What do you mean they're solving a problem? How does this correlate to Bitcoin and to transacting value? How does that work? Okay, the problem that they're solving is a proof of work, POW. That is this guy right here, block reward and proof of work. All right. So you remember when I was explaining to you what a blockchain is? Boop, boop, boop. Boop, boop, boop. I'm going to give you a very, very, very simplistic explanation of how this works. This is an incredibly complex and honestly somewhat confusing process. But let's say this is block 1, 2, and 3 in order, right? The information in here is nothing more than a record keep of the approved and validated transactions, right? So remember, we're number one, that these little devices are doing, they're approving the fact, remember my drawing a second ago, they're approving of me giving Bob 1 Bitcoin. That information, let's say it gets stored in this block, all right? Some time has passed, right? These are about 10 minutes in length. That's how long it takes to create one block. This block here, 10 minutes. This block here, 10 minutes. And all of a sudden, let's say this is present history, right? And what these miners are doing is filling in the transaction ledger and keeping everybody's balance up to date. And in here, if you zoomed in, you'd see, Nick had 9 Bitcoin. Wow, that's a G, not a 9. Obviously, it wouldn't be detailed like this. It would, instead of saying Nick, it wouldn't have my name. It would have my wallet address. And we're going to get to that down the road, so don't get confused here yet. But Nick had 9 BTC. Then he gave away 1 BTC. And now he has 8 BTC, right? If you zoomed in on this information, you would see that this 1 BTC went to Bob. Obviously, not Bob's name, just his wallet address. That's what's being filled in here in this current block in real time, let's just say. All right? Now, what each of these blocks have is something called a block reward. All right? Basically, while this block is being filled in, there's a giant math problem that has to be solved that is very, very difficult. These devices, remember when I told you how loud they are? The reason that they are so loud is because they are computing something referred to as, they're sorting through hash rates. A hash is just a string of numbers, okay? It's a string of numbers, and these devices are going through, like the Antminer S9, I believe, goes through 13.5 trillion hashes per second, which means it is flying through information. Absolutely flying through information. All right? What proof of work just refers to is that this device, a GPU or the ASIC, has to solve a problem where they have to find a string of numbers in a sequential order. Okay? And again, I don't want to get confusing. All I want you to know is that proof of work actually makes things difficult. And you may think to yourself, why is that good? Why is it good that proof of work is difficult? Why? Why would we want that? Why does that make it an incentive to partake in this peer-to-peer network called Bitcoin if it's difficult? I don't understand. You'd think if it was easy, everybody would do it, right? Well, no, that's not the case. And here's why. Let me give you the quickest, easiest example that I know how to. Let's say that all of a sudden, everybody in the world figures out that all they have to do is go out into their backyard with a shovel, and suddenly they can all mine 1 ounce of gold. Okay, this is a fictitious story, obviously. But let's say everybody can go outside into their backyard and start digging holes in their backyards, and everybody in the world is allowed to pull up 1 ounce of gold. And everybody can, right? And it's easy. If that happened, what would be the result of the value of gold? Remember, everything in economics is a supply and demand game, right? Very simply put. And this gets overstated sometimes, and not overstated. This gets overlooked often. Supply and demand is absolutely fundamental to anything that has a value proposition, right? If all of a sudden everybody went in the backyard and dug up an ounce of gold, what would happen to the supply of gold? The circulating supply of gold would skyrocket because there's 8 billion people in the world. Not everybody owns a home, I realize, but even if a quarter of those people own their own home, all of a sudden supply would spike, all right? And demand wouldn't necessarily increase. So if you have more supply and demand hasn't changed, what would happen to the value of gold? It would drop because more people that have their ounces. What would you do if you found an ounce of gold today in your backyard? The price of gold today is somewhere around $1,500, $1,500 USD. What would you do if you found $1,500 worth of precious metal in your backyard? Probably, like me, you'd go to a store and sell it. Well, what happens if there's a ton of sellers all of a sudden that just come into the market? Price drop. That's it. Because I would sell mine for $1,500, and you'd say, "Whoa, he sold. I want to sell mine before he sells his, so I'm going to sell mine for $14.99." And let's say 1,000 people get away with selling theirs for $14.99, and then somebody else comes in and goes, "Whoa, I'm going to sell mine. I'm going to list mine cheaper. I'm going to list mine for $14.98." And then somebody said, "Well, I'm going to list mine for $14.80. I just want mine gone." And all of a sudden, you get where this is going, right? If demand hasn't changed, but supply skyrockets, then prices just drop because everybody who gets access to something like that all of a sudden decides that it's time to jump in and get rid of it. Proof of work is designed to be a difficult thing because it means that there aren't a ton of devices and computers all over the world that can solve the problem. All right? Now, here's something that's interesting that we haven't talked about yet. There's something here that I refer to as the block reward, right? That's this guy right here. Block reward and proof of work means that if your device, if your GPU is the one that discovers this proof of work equation, discovers the answer to it, if your Antminer S9 right here, or your GPU, whatever you're running, doesn't matter, if your device solves the equation to this block, you get paid out a block reward. Right now, it's September of 2019. The block reward is 12.5 Bitcoins. So does that make sense? Every single block here has something called a block reward. Every single block here has an equation that needs to be solved. Every single one of them. And obviously, I drew 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks. There's millions of blocks, but you get where this is going. Every single block reward, every one of them got solved and then created. Every single one of them paid out as a block reward 12.5 Bitcoins. Okay? Let's say you were the lucky one who had their block solved here on this last one. This will get deposited directly into your Bitcoin wallet address. Congratulations, you did it. Fantastic work. You now have 12.5 Bitcoins. Okay, so here's why I wrote in parentheses this word incentivizing. Because I just went over probably the first and most important rule of economics, and that's supply and demand. All right? Supply and demand. The supply and demand 100% dictate value. If there's limited supply and increasing demand, prices do what? They go up over time. And that's really steep. I don't know if I'd draw that in terms of a chart. That's like more of like a parabolic advance. I'm not really talking about that, but you get my point. I would say that the first and foremost, most important rule in economics is supply and demand. The second one, I would argue, is this word incentive. Incentive. This is a human psychology word, and we're going to talk about it more down the road. But think about this for a minute. Ask yourself for just a second, why would I go spend money on this device, turn it on, and have it run electricity in my home? Why would I do that? Right here. Satoshi Nakamoto knows that what drives people are incentives. What drives people, what gets people to do things and to be active is the incentive to earn right here. Now, I'm going to talk about incentives for a second, but I want to get back to one more thing that's interesting. All right? Nick and Bob, in my world famous example now, Nick and Bob, Nick sending Bob 1 BTC, 1 Bitcoin over to Bob. Of course, everybody in all my drawings is happy and just enjoying their lives. So that's why they're all smiling. In this transaction, Nick sends 1 Bitcoin over to Bob. There is something in here called a transaction. I'm going to abbreviate that with TRX fee. A transaction fee. It's really simple. This is the way it works. I send 1 Bitcoin over to Bob, and I pay, in order to have this service validated, I pay a transaction fee. Let's just say in this case, it's 0.01 BTC. 0.01 means that it's 1% of 1 Bitcoin. Okay? This 0.0, and I'm making up a number. The transaction fees aren't fixed. They're actually calculated and decided in some cases, and we'll get to that down the road. But nevertheless, what you need to know is when I move 1 Bitcoin over to Bob, there's a transaction fee of, in this case, I'm making it up, it's 0.01 Bitcoin. Okay? So where does this transaction fee go? It goes to every single miner that helped write my transaction in here. All right? So these mining devices are basically paying me. If I ran this in my basement, or I ran this in my basement, I am getting paid a transaction fee for validating a transaction, and I also could potentially get this as well if I solve the proof of work thing. Okay? So I'm incentivized to partake in this Bitcoin peer-to-peer cash payments network. I'm incentivized because I can make money by partaking. I can make money passively, arguably. I can make money by simply confirming or denying this transaction, this whole ordeal going down. This amount of money here, this amount of Bitcoin gets deposited in my wallet, and then I can do whatever I want with it. I can cash out, I can sell it. So let me give you an example of kind of how this worked here with my Antminer S9, all right? Because this is what I used here. And I'm terribly sorry. I'm just going to get a new picture because I literally scribbled all over this thing. Antminer S9, boom. All right, so here's my Antminer S9 in my basement, loud as could be. My wife she's so sweet. I love her to death. But she was like, Nick, you got to turn that thing off. It is so obnoxious. And she's right, honestly. So here's the economics. If you're wondering, well, how much do you get paid? How much incentive was there to make money? And I'm going to tell you, okay? So I'll just run you through the very basic economics of my situation. All right, the Antminer S9 cost me, I'm going to say about $250 US. That's how much it cost me. Excuse me. I bought my Antminer S9 off of eBay. I spent $250 for an Antminer S9 and something referred to as a PSU, a power supply unit. Okay, this device plugs into the power supply unit. Power supply unit plugs into my electricity at home, to my outlet, and then I'm off to the races. Right here, if you could kind of see right there, there's an Ethernet port. Ethernet port plugs right into there, hooks up to the internet, and that's how this bad boy connects to a thing. All right, so it cost me about $250 to buy. All right, purchase price. In electricity, it cost me every month to run it about $50. I have really cheap electricity in Cleveland. And so thankfully, running this guy 24 hours a day was somewhere between, I think it was, I never ran it all day, every day. That was part of my problem. But it was somewhere between an extra 45 to, let's just say, $60. So I kind of met in the middle and said, all right, let's just say it's about $50. Just easy round number. Per month, this is my cost in electricity. However, at the time when I bought this bad boy, I was making about 2%. Yeah, it was more than that. I was making about 2%, let's just say 2% of a Bitcoin per month. Now that may not seem like a lot, okay? This was back at the end of 2018. I was more experimenting than anything. I wanted to understand a lot more about how mining worked. So I'm going to summarize all the economics here in just a second. But if I'm making 0.02 BTC per month, that means at the end of the year, in 12 months, I would have 0.24 BTC a year, about just under 25% of one Bitcoin. And there's decimal places in Bitcoin. They're referred to as Satoshis, but they go back, I think, 8 digits in total. So here I was spending about $50 a month in electricity, $250 to purchase the device. And you may be saying, okay, are you going to make money on this, or how's this working? So fast forward to September in 2019. I mean, even this summer, Bitcoin hit in price $14,000 this summer. All right, Bitcoin hit $14,000. Now the question is, does this thing make you money? Yes or no? And I didn't sell my Bitcoin. I haven't sold it. But if you have 20, let's just call this 25%, because it actually was a lot closer to, there's, again, adding up all the decimal points. 25% of a Bitcoin at $14,000 Bitcoin price means that over the course of 12 months, I now have $3,500 worth of Bitcoin. Okay, now for me, I didn't sell my Bitcoin, but in 12 months, this is the value here. Now, mind you, I spent $50 a month is $600, right? $600 plus $250. I spent about $850 to get going, to get all this stuff up and running, but your net was somewhere around $3,500. Not too shabby, right? That means after all my expenses, I'm still making well over $2,500 every year. So do you see where this gets kind of exciting? I can partake in this network. And by the way, I didn't have to apply. This is important. I didn't have to apply. I didn't have to go let anybody know. I didn't have to get anybody's permission. All I had to do was buy this device, and I joined something called a mining pool. Sorry, I bought this device here. I joined something called a mining pool. A mining pool just refers to the fact that I use my computing power in a giant pool of other devices using their computing power, so that way all of us collectively can work at solving this proof of work equation so we can all get paid this block reward. Does that make sense? That's how, by approving transactions and by solving this block reward, I would get paid on average about 0.02 Bitcoin per month, which again, as of August, I think it was July, when Bitcoin hit $14,000 in 12 months, my $850 that I spent is now worth $3,500. Now, obviously, the price of Bitcoin will fluctuate. It'll go up, it'll go down. For me, I'm not worried because I'm interested in long term. I'm not selling any of my Bitcoin that I mined. I'm holding on to it. What I'm interested in, and I don't mind the idea of spending $850 because there's people out there who are saying that Bitcoin's going to hit 250,000 US dollars. Do I agree? I would have to think that the numbers are there. Yes. And I know that sounds crazy. I get it. If you go back throughout the years and look through Reddit, for example, and go ahead and look at people's price predictions of Bitcoin hitting like $1,000 way back in like 2011 and stuff. I mean, the amount of mockery that took place of Bitcoin hitting 1,000. By the way, at the time, Bitcoin hadn't even hit $100, let alone 1,000, and people just went all over them. And then people would predict, oh, it hit 1,000, it's going to hit 3,000, and everybody said, no way, no chance, no how, not going to. And then Bitcoin smashed through 3,000. Oh, Bitcoin's going to hit 10 grand. It's just so on and so forth, right? You get my point. So what I want you to understand here is this idea of incentives. I think that Satoshi Nakamoto understands that human nature partakes in activity when they have an incentive. What's your incentive? This right here, $3,500. My incentive is that I can make money by partaking in approving transactions on the Bitcoin protocol, right? I think these are the two most important economic principles that don't get talked about enough. Supply and demand, okay, fair enough. But incentives, people do things when they know there's a benefit. So the question is, right, why would people ask it all the time. That's why I'm bringing it up. Why would people want to let their computers run? Why would they want to spend money on electricity just to approve this transaction between Bob and I? Well, of course, the idea is that they make money doing it. Simple. They make money. It's profitable to join the network and approve transactions between Nick and Bob. It's profitable to act and behave in a good manner rather than trying to act in a bad manner. And Satoshi found a way to incentivize people to partake in this peer-to-peer network. Okay? Pretty darn fascinating if you ask me. Now, I'm sure people are asking, oh wait, you did this, how can I do this? Well, the question is, it's going to require a lot of research, number one. And number two is, the Antminer S9, it's not that it's outdated, but you're going to need to look into new devices because there's a lot of things that have changed since then. And I don't believe the payout per month would be 0.02 Bitcoin any longer. I think it might be closer to 0.1% of a Bitcoin, which still, by the way, is not a bad day. For me, imagine you have 0.25 Bitcoin, and Bitcoin goes to $100,000 someday. Right? Again, this isn't entirely about the money, but the money is important. You know what that equals? 25,000 US dollars. This 0.25 BTC at $100,000 per Bitcoin is 25,000 US dollars. Having spent 850. That is a trade I will make all day long, and I think you will as well. All right, enough about that. So those are the two things that Bitcoin is up to, that these mining devices are up to, approving and validating transactions. And what do they get? What do these devices get for doing that? They get the transaction fee, TRX fee, right? What's the second thing that they do? They solve a problem referred to as proof of work, which is a difficult task. And what do they get if their device here is the one responsible for solving this proof of work equation? They get this thing called the block reward, right? Block reward. All right. Now, let's talk about this idea called decentralization. And I think that this is going to be slightly easier to talk about than the other things. I'm almost done. I don't want this to go on for too long. But the idea of decentralization, decentralization refers to the idea that, again, let's compare and contrast money and who controls it, right? In our current system, it's simple. Banks. In the one that we're hoping increases in adoption is Bitcoin. Who validates transactions within a bank? The bank. That's it. It's not decentralized. It's centralized. All right? They are the ones who control the money. Decentralized. They control the money flow. They do. And when we talk about bigger things like central banks literally control the money supply. They control the value of money. They increase and decrease interest rates. And guess what? They don't care if it hurts you. They do not. They are not interested. They remember this word, incentives. This is what stinks about our current economic system, is that banks do not have any incentives. You know, when we're talking about money creation, they don't have any incentives to help you. They do not. You don't benefit from it. You actually get hurt, because there's this wonderful concept referred to as inflation, right? They constantly dump money into the market and more money into the market, and they manipulate interest rates. This isn't just Nick talking. This is Satoshi Nakamoto. That's why in the Genesis block he's saying, great, the banks are now about to receive their 1,000th bailout globally, because banks are so foolish and insolvent that they can't stay afloat without creating more money and bailing them out. That's the nature of banking. If you think that bailouts is a new idea, then you need to understand, if you're U.S. especially, if you're interested in U.S. monetary policy, you need to understand what the Federal Reserve is and does. I mentioned to you all, I believe, that the first aha moment I had about how money works and how flawed our system is was reading a book called The Creature from Jekyll Island. The Creature from Jekyll Island. I can never remember the author's name. It escapes me. But if you have not read this book and you have some interest in how our government absolutely gives money to banks, and at your cost, by the way, at your dime, if you're interested in that, you need to read this book. It's unreal. It'll change your worldview. It'll make you say, why are we using this ridiculous, centralized, authoritative monetary policy when we can use Bitcoin? Bitcoin is decentralized, meaning there is no single party that controls the supply of Bitcoin. What it is an algorithm that pays out, right, the Bitcoin block rewards, right, that we've already talked about, and the transaction fee, which is, I didn't scroll over far enough, right here. It's an algorithm that pays this stuff out. It is not a central bank. It is not a government. It's not Satoshi. Satoshi Nakamoto is not sitting behind a computer approving transactions and giving people away free Bitcoin. That's not how it works. It's an algorithm. And every single person gets to partake in this protocol. In our current monetary system, not everybody gets to partake in our monetary system. In fact, I'll argue that the only people that get to partake in our monetary system is Congress and the Fed. That's it. That's it. The only people that benefit from the creation of money are congressmen who lobby on behalf of the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve because they make money no matter what. They don't care. I hate to sound like a tinfoil hat person right now, but these are the facts. And this is the way it's been pretty much since the beginning of money, of government-issued fiat currency, is that the governments rule and the people suffer. And I'm not saying, oh, this is a sob story for poor citizens, but at the same time, I'm in the U.S., so I don't even feel like I'm qualified to talk about some of these things, but I'm watching what's going on over in Venezuela right now. It's the end of 2019, approaching the end of 2019, and the government has absolutely obliterated their currency, and the people over there are rioting and starving. I don't know what that's like. I've never had to live through that life. I sympathize and I empathize with the people over there, and I say, man, I wish governments and centralized authorities and banks didn't have the ability to tax the people so heavily in inflation that it kills everybody's net worth. What's interesting about the U.S. dollar with inflation is that the U.S. dollar over time always decreases in value. Why? Because you remember that simple thing about supply and demand? When supply increases and demand either stays the same or goes down, what happens to the value? It drops. That's what happens in an inflationary thing. Bitcoin is not inflationary. Bitcoin has a max reserve or max circulation of 21 million Bitcoin. That means supply is not increasing. It's fixed, and demand for an asset like Bitcoin should continue to go up. What happens to the value of that over time? It goes up, and it's notably so, right? I started this entire lecture series talking about how Bitcoin went from 1 penny to 20,000 US dollars. If anybody wants to sit here and argue with me and say, well, that's not happening with Bitcoin, Bitcoin's not increasing in value, then I don't even know what to say. Because it's very clear to me that my US dollars 20 years ago have decreased in purchasing power, where my Bitcoin that I mined months ago have increased my purchasing power, right? Are you seeing that here? I hope this is, I don't want to overwhelm you with all my writing. I know this is crazy. We're talking about a ton of things, and we're talking about a lot of big ideas here. I don't want to confuse you. I just want to show you that I believe the benefits of the Bitcoin protocol, the peer-to-peer cash payments network, being decentralized is far superior to the centralized authority we have right here with banks. And I'm not the one saying that on my own. This is also from Satoshi Nakamoto himself. So, let's recap real quick. And I swear I will end this video here. You can get back to your day. Satoshi Nakamoto understands the ideas of supply and demand. Satoshi Nakamoto understands that human psychology would imply and demand, I'll even say, that people operate out of incentives. So what did he do? He created a Bitcoin protocol where anybody in the world can purchase a device or use their computers to partake in these two activities, approving transactions, solving a problem, so you can earn money via a transaction fee and a block reward. And you can partake in this network, and you don't have to have a specific net worth. You don't have to have a certain disposition. You don't have to have a specific time frame. You don't have to be committed for 10 years. You could be committed for 2 months and say, I'm done. You don't have to keep your Antminer S9 running for 6 months straight. You can run it for a day, turn it off, turn it back on the next day, turn it off the next day. You can. This literally is up to you. Satoshi Nakamoto created this decentralized peer-to-peer cash payments network to get people incentivized and make it profitable for you and I to create a monetary system where governments don't have any control over how this works. And you may be saying, oh yeah, I've seen headlines of Jamie Dimon coming out and saying that Bitcoin is a fraud. Yeah, you know why? Because this is his circle. His business model, that I'm going to talk about in the next section, relies heavily on killing your worth. I'm sorry, I'm not a tinfoil hat. This isn't a conspiracy. I'm not anti-government. And let me just say this to you. I am not anti-banks. I am not saying get rid of banks. That's not my disposition. I use a bank. I have a credit card. I have a debit card. I have a mortgage. I also have a business, right, that I started with a small business loan. So I'm not anti-banks. I'm anti this. I'm anti our current monetary system killing the value of my dollar and driving it down, 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 down. Because essentially that's what happens with our monetary system. What I'd love to see is I'd love to see the ability for banks to be able to lend, but I'd love to see this continue on. Asset appreciation, things going up in value, right? I want to see this happen in my money. It can. Oh, yikes. It can happen with our money. And that's what this decentralized peer-to-peer cash payments network accomplishes.